First off, welcome everybody to this episode of Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. I have to say that I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Sanjana Modha. Sanjana, what a treat to have you on. Thank you so much for joining.
It's a pleasure to be on with you and to be talking all things food, which is my favorite subject.
Speaking of food, it being about 4 or 5 o'clock there and morning for me, I have to ask you the place where both of those converge is lunch. So, what did you have for lunch today?
Oh my goodness, I had leftovers because there are always leftovers in my house. So I've been working on a new recipe for palak paneer orzo, which is a bit of a mashup Indian and Italian.
Wow.
And I have been testing that recipe out. So everything that I have for my breakfast, lunch, and dinner is usually something consisting of leftovers.
Hmm. Right, grabbing stuff and being creative with it. You know, eating leftovers and even having leftovers is somewhat of an art to itself, and it sort of speaks to the immediate creativity that you have to have with either repurposing or reimagining something, or even having a way to take and preserve and in a way conserve your food. So, particularly for you, is there an entirely different art of how to find better ways to deal with leftovers?
You know what? I think that it's ingrained within our very bones is making sure that there's zero waste, especially coming from South Asian community. Our
Yeah,
parents were masters of preserving and conserving things, whether it's pickles and achars to stash away in the fridge. If you have mangoes that are in season, you better
right.
make 10, 12 jars of that so that you can keep it for when the food is looking a little bit sparse or you fancy a taste of summer during the winter. So I think all of that has been my training, that background, and I've become very good at it. And I think that it's equipped me with a lot of skills that I now have for kind of batch cooking and stashing things away in my freezer as well, which I find is really, really useful for the days where I'm cooking just for me or I just want something really quick. So I tend to batch
Yeah,
cook and prepare in advance for the freezer too.
yeah, and I imagine we were just sharing at least a bit before joining about our children, and I'm so curious. Um, whether or not cooking for you changed, or at least the rhythm of cooking changed, even the art of cooking changed for you when you became a parent.
Very much so, I think. I became a lot more mindful of making sure that our meals were very balanced. I think that that's really important generally for our health, but I think you become a lot more mindful of it when you have a little one who's growing and needs all of those nutrients. So I'm making sure that with us being vegetarian as well, that we're getting our fiber and our protein and our portion of carbs. So kind of making sure that all of our meals are very balanced in that way is something that I became a lot more mindful of. And also chili as well, because I'm a big chili head. So everything that I cook has now got no chili in it. And then at the table, that's when we add it. We either fresh chili, chili flakes, black pepper, things like that,
Yeah.
because my little one is, he's not about the chili life.
Well, you're right that, like, balance is so critical to our food, and having that sort of sense of balance early on is great, especially as a parent. I'm curious for you, did you, in changing your mindset in preparing food and consuming food as a parent, and now sort of gathering, if you will, and making sure that you're providing for your child. I'm sure if I'm curious if did you suddenly seek out connection with your own parents and your own grandparents through that food?
Very much so, yeah. The first meal that I cooked for Bodhi, my son, was a bowl of khichdi. And that was my first meal when I was a
Mm,
baby. And it's so
yeah,
wholesome, it's so nutritious. We have our lentils in there, we have rice, and it's that soft kind of comforting porridge consistency that is just, it's perfect for those first bites of food. And with the spices that we're putting in there as well, it's very much, it's a taste of home. And to
mm,
rediscover all of those flavors and understand really the alchemy behind cooking those meals, where we're adding things like asafoetida or hing, which is going to help in the digestion of those lentils. Just learning those things and rediscovering and reconnecting helped me kind of forge the blueprint for how I want to feed my child.
yeah, yeah. Wow. I love that idea of having a blueprint that's already sort of ready made for you,
Mm.
and it's really a lot of reminiscing and comfort and that feeling of home, and yet that cycle, hopefully now continues as well. One of the themes of your work that strikes me so much is your ability to take Indian food, which seems for many very daunting, right? Because of how intricate it is and how complex it is and how comprehensive it is, especially when it comes to flavors and substance. Um, but your ability to take all of that and simplify it and make it practical has struck me quite a bit. Um, does this, in a way, kind of describe your own personality and your style when it comes to not just food, but you just as a person, as a human?
I think so. I'm a bit of a rule breaker, so and I always have been, and I think that's where the fun lies in cooking. Especially, I don't think that there is a right or a wrong way to do things. There are traditions, there are customs. They don't always have to be followed. I think that there's always an element of respect that we show towards our food and the cultures from which they came. But I don't think that playing around with certain things in life is, I see it as a growth opportunity rather than something that is limiting.
Yeah. No, that's great. And does it allow then in your own sort of universe, making sure that you have respect to the tradition and yet the practicality of what's in front of you and what the time factors that play in and the ingredients factors that play in. Sometimes you actually need to problem solve on the fly, and getting practical with that is something I appreciate. Does that help you not just in cooking but in life?
I think so. Yeah, yeah. I think that we need to mold. We need to bend to the requirements of our everyday life. And there's always going to be days where we're either too tired or we've just had so much on, we've got school play. And I think those things are really important to be present for our children. And if that means that we're just grabbing something out of the freezer that we've prepared a couple of weeks before, then so be it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a as a person and as a parent, particularly if you can be a rapid problem solver on the fly and find good solutions, that's always great. Um, I'm wondering, because of that respect for tradition and the at least inherent knowledge that you have of what the backdrop is behind the food, what the backdrop is behind all the stories that are there. How is your relationship with cooking and writing helped you kind of connect the dots from Gujarat to Africa, now to Britain for you?
I've always loved writing. It's always been my preferred method of communicating. It's only recently with social media that I've developed my photography and my video as a way to embellish those written stories that have always been collecting and simmering at the back of my mind. And the writing element of that has been the main gateway for me to express how that has impacted myself, my family, my parents, and sometimes I just love to sit with them and hear the stories. And there is nothing to me that is more soul warming than sitting in a room with my aunts and my uncles, my parents, just listening to the stories of my grandparents and their journeys that led them from Gujarat. They came from families of farmers and then became traders, went to East Africa and worked on sugarcane plantations, which were big business back then. And
Yeah.
with the British then kind of carving that path for them, they went there. They made use of their British passports, and my parents ended up coming to the UK. And I think just sitting and listening to those stories has helped me connect so much with the culture, and the route from which it speaks to me the most is through the food, because we tell the stories through our food.
Hmm. Do you think that, now being in Buckinghamshire, that there is also some reverse contribution for your parents and even your grandparents when they at some point, whether it's, the first layer of immigration and then the sort of second layer, getting to Buckinghamshire. Do you think that Buckinghamshire, especially now for you, is contributing backwards in a way as well, if that makes sense?
Absolutely, just in terms of my global view. And I grew up in Yorkshire, which is in the north of England. I spent the first 20 years of my life there. And we were very much, I was the only Indian in my school. And I grew up with friends of very different backgrounds to myself. They all were very English, come from English working class families. And the things that I saw them eating, the foods that I saw in their lunch boxes, even those were, I think, coming from an Indian family, being the only Indian, you so badly when you're a child want to assimilate. And I did very much that. So I would go home and say to my mom, like, can we have tomato soup and bread? Or can we have beans on toast? And bless my mum, she always found a way to kind of reverse engineer it, give it a little bit of an Indian touch. But we had the beans on toast nevertheless. But she
Yeah.
would do it with a whole tarka of spices. She would add her curry leaves, her asafoetida, mustard seeds, and that was the way that we would eat our beans on toast. So yeah, definitely, there's crossover of culture in coming from all the directions.
Yeah, I have a very similar experience with that in, reimagining the American grilled cheese sandwich as a play on pav bhaji. So there's lots and lots of ways to try and do that, but that's great. And, something that at least, is a commonality for me and perhaps many others in that same storytelling and thinking back of your own childhood in Yorkshire and thinking about what are in other children's lunch boxes and kind of being in that kind of a situation, that many can identify with. When do you first remember identifying as a vegetarian? And for that matter, and has that always been linked for you in being an Indian, being a South Asian? Um, there clearly is some tie to that. But do you remember those first moments of like noticing and thinking and feeling that like, yes, I am a vegetarian, and there's a reason for that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And thinking back to it, I felt very different for being, I was not only the only Indian in school, but also the only vegetarian. I mean, it was the
Right.
90s, and being vegetarian, vegan, that was so unheard of back then. So when we would go on school trips or sit in the lunch hall, I would have to specify that, oh, I can't eat that. I'm vegetarian. So I would have to look at the board that was up in the dining hall at school, thinking, what can I have? What can I have? And there wasn't always a vegetarian option. So some days I would just be there like having peas and carrots, because
Right.
they weren't catering to those special diets. And sometimes my friends would say, like, is that all you're having? And
Right.
I I it didn't seem strange. It was kind of normalized at that point. I think when you're that young, um,
Yeah.
it. it felt different. It was definitely an othering kind of experience for me,
Yeah.
but the connection to the culture, I think, I, because I wasn't that connected to that many Indian people, I just thought all Indians were vegetarian by that point. It was
Right.
only when I
Right.
was much older, I went to college and there's a big Pakistani community in the north of England. So I had lots of Pakistani friends. And it dawned on me that, oh, look, not all South Asian people are vegetarian. And that's when I
Right. Right.
became really curious.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that the experiences, of course, being limited to having peas and carrots, and yet in an Indian vegetarian household, the that would really be unheard of in a way because the complexity behind vegetarian food is just so enormous, and how much you do with that, and yet that's definitely not the experience of perhaps people who are growing up in that era, with vegetarian menu at school, for instance. And I'm wondering if that element of your experience, and then thinking of now of your college experience, as you mentioned, and even transcending to now. I wonder how that has been an evolution for you to sort of identify what this modern vegetarianism is for you, or even a modern veganism for you. Um, how are all these links and dots connected in a way?
You make a really good point there, and I think you're spot on. I think yes, it very much has, because there's all from stemming from that scarcity kind of mindset that was forming without me even knowing as a child. I've now become very aware that it doesn't mean going without being vegetarian, creating vegetarian meals, even vegan meals. It I what I want through my work is to show that you never have to go without, because there is always a way to make it work. And even
Right.
if that means just turning something like peas and carrots into something spectacular, and let's do it. And you can make an abundance of things, like you mentioned pav bhaji, right? Even if
Right.
you've only got peas and carrots, let's make pav bhaji with just peas and carrots and add all of our masalas, make it taste great. And I think that that's really the beauty of coming from a place where not everything was always so accessible. I was lucky in my generation that we had access to a lot of things, but our parents didn't. My parents, when we were growing up, didn't have access to all of the things that we do today. So yeah, I think it's very interesting how you've mashed that together, and it makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, we're grateful, right? Like the world is globally connected. We can identify and imagine, more and more varieties, and methods and ways to connect through vegetarian food, and yet also it still comes back to not completely complex ingredients, and
Mm.
simple things that we can now reimagine and do so much more with. I wonder if there's a specificity to Indian cuisine that has therefore now evolved in Buckinghamshire or London or England. And I'm particularly thinking about the creativity behind your samosa stuffed crust pizza. Like there's the idea of, again, that kind of blend or that creativity that, or other similar things that are so specific to the locality of where you are.
I think seasonality it plays very deeply into things that I cook. I like to make sure that what I am creating is quite seasonal, and just from drawing upon life's experiences, having traveled and enjoyed food, having friends from all over the world. And I think even in our localities and in our villages and towns, we have such a multicultural society where we have different influences coming at us from everywhere. There are an abundance of restaurants where we can go and try new foods and be curious, and drawing all of those experiences back and bringing them home into my own kitchen sometimes I think that there is just an urge that takes over that makes me want to say, well, you know what? I love this dish. I love pizza and I love samosas. So let's
Yeah,
see what we can do. Like we have leftovers. We have leftover samosa filling. Let's put it in this. We're making pizzas anyway. Let's put it in the crust and see what happens. And sometimes
right.
it's delicious. Sometimes it's a disaster, but we learn and we have fun.
Yeah, and it seems like those are the really new nuggets and interesting innovations that come through that experimentation. But and yet they specifically could be a, brand new neighborhood thing that's not found anyplace else, and a style of food. And do you find that worldwide, as you connect with more chefs and people who are interested in food, and particularly in Indian vegetarian food, that those styles actually really are true, and they manifest? And there's a Gujarati style of making food, there's now a London style of making food, there's a New York style of maybe making food. As and yet, as we grow that much more connected, does there start to become a specificity to Indian cuisine outside of India?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think it will always have its essence. And one thing I've noticed a lot is that North Indian cuisine is very prevalent globally. When people think of
Yeah,
Indian cuisine, their minds will automatically go to a butter chicken or a paneer
right.
tikka, a saag paneer, and all of those things are really popular here in the UK as well. Like even when I was growing up in the 90s, everyone knew what pakore was. They would have
Yeah,
it down at the British Indian curry house, and all of that has felt like an evolution. I think we've moved on from those days where it was all about going down to the restaurant for a curry and a cobra, and
yeah,
it's no longer like that anymore. We have dosa restaurants right here in my own town, which would have been amazing for me growing up. I
yeah,
think my eyes would have
yeah.
been
I mean,
opened and
and being
exposed
able to have that
to a lot of
diversity, I
those
think, is
flavors,
is
enjoying them a lot more.
yeah, of course, of course. Um, I did have one thought, and that is, for you, as someone who kind of now designs and thinks about recipes, and especially being able to share that with an audience, whether that's virtually, on social media, or through your upcoming book, is there an anatomy to a great recipe? Is there a way to communicate through your recipes that you feel is important, and especially in designing a recipe? Is there a good anatomy to a great recipe?
I think so. And one thing I really like to look at for this is it affordable? Is it relatable? Is it accessible in many different ways? The affordability is one factor, but can we get hold of the ingredients? Are they in season? How
Mm,
how do we select ingredients that will be easy to come by for people and rework them in a way that feels relatable to an audience? So I'll give you an example. I did a two ingredient ice cream barfi last year for Diwali, and it went viral on social media. You need just a tub of ice cream and some milk powder because all of your fats are in the ice cream, all of your sugar is in the ice cream. You
yeah,
don't need to add anything else. That no butter, no ghee, nothing. It's just the full fat milk powder and ice cream. You mix it up, cook it, you set it in a tray, and there you've got your barfi. And it's relatable because my audience in particular, I have a big South Asian following, and it's something that they all grew up eating. Everyone's had, whether it's a birth or a marriage or any kind of special occasion where we serve our Indian sweets. They share barfis. They share it. It comes wrapped in memories. I think Indian sweets in particular, they're
yeah.
very have this celebratory nature about them, and I think it just felt so nostalgic for people. And then on the other hand, it was very easy to do. So I had lots of people remaking it.
Yeah, I love that. I think having those components to any recipe, whether it's for a mitai, whether it's for something sweet, whether it's for, even a quick or even an elaborate meal, hopefully the method that someone can take from a recipe and the sort of practice of of creating that food and then enjoying it is something that a recipe can help deliver. And it sounds like those are the kind of components that you're working with as well when you're writing those recipes. Um, Making this book surely, I'm imagining, has been quite the journey. And one thing that struck me in one of the excerpts about chai that I read that you shared starts out with that Sanskrit phrase, "Atiti Devo Bhava," and almost as an homage to the sacredness of hospitality, right? Um, and I'm curious now that for a tradition of cooking as an exercise in sharing and welcoming others, and of course the hospitality of it, what did you perhaps have to learn about yourself and personal expression and personal authenticity in making Sanjana feasts, especially in sharing so much of a tradition that's about, in fact, catering to others.
I really had to look inwards actually, because I think growing up, my family were very much into welcoming guests. When my grandfather, my dad always reminds me of this, is whenever someone comes over to the house, you first thing you do is you offer them chai, you offer them a drink, then all the snacks come out, and it's kind of this kind
Right.
of like slow drip feeding food. But it's always been ingrained within my family culture, and I think writing the book led me back down those old paths where maybe we
Mm,
don't have so many guests in our homes these days. Everyone's so busy, but back in the day, they would turn up, people would turn up unannounced, and it was absolutely fine. There would be no panic. I feel like these days we kind of everyone's got a busy schedule and everything needs to be planned out. But
right.
I
You have to
think just
pre-plan everything. Yeah.
exactly. So just revisiting all of those old memories of when guests would turn up unannounced, and just being grateful and feeling whole at the fact that it's an opportunity for you to connect, and just revisiting those memories really helped me kind of carve out where I wanted to go within that chapter of the book, and then throughout the book itself.
Mm. And I'm wondering, was in a way looking inward so that more and more of you could come through in the book in all of those chapters. Were there any surprises along the way that you were like, wow, I didn't even know this about myself, and yet here it is.
Yeah, I think gosh, I think revisiting the old days where my parents really worked hard. We had a shop in West Yorkshire. My parents worked 7 days a week. It was really early wake ups, and just going back to those moments where I remembered saying to my mom, like, I don't want to eat Indian food anymore. Like, when you're a kid and you're just like, well, I've got games tomorrow, I've got PE tomorrow. I don't want my hair to smell of Indian food, and
Right.
all of those things would crop back up. And I think since then, and from becoming a parent myself, like just learning to value and appreciate those things, that the sacrifices that my parents made for my brother and I, that they really helped me kind of grow, I think, as a person and as a parent. And revisiting those memories through writing about them, it made me even more grateful to have had that kind of experience growing up, even though it felt very different, and I felt very different, awkward at those times in my life. Like, I wouldn't change it for the world now.
Yeah, there's that's so beautiful so far because I think there's a reconciliation with that, of course, as people grow older, and it how that integrates back into your storytelling, into the work that you do. It seems like that's been a nice, elegant weave. Um, I'm going to hit you with a couple of kind of more rapid fire, you know, style questions here, or just even some thoughts to pick your brain a little bit. But I'm curious if you have a go-to dessert that you love making.
My sticky toffee gulab jamun.
Okay, yep, that's the one.
That's the
Number
one. If
one
you
on the
don't make
list.
anything from the book, just make that.
Just make that.
Mm.
Okay. Well, in this case, I hope I will be eating that, but yes, making that will be part of it for sure. Um, what's your, this is one that comes up for many, but what's your quickest and easiest substitute for eggs?
Oh, some blended up silken tofu does a great job of replacing eggs. It really depends on what you're making, if it's a dessert or a main. But I have a hacker noodle recipe in the book, and I've used up some whizzed up silken tofu with some besan, gram flour mixed in.
Hmm. Do you ever use flaxseed or almond substitutes at all?
Yeah, so for baking, flax seeds are really good. For replacing an egg in a cookie, just some soaked flax seeds work a treat.
Okay, great, great. And I was curious about one thing. This is not really a rapid fire question, but just even sort of a mental exercise. But if you somehow imagine that you are cooking one thing right now for your parents and your grandparents as kind of a single dish expression of who you are and where you've come from, what would it actually be?
Dal bhat, Gujarati dal bhat. So some Gujarati tuar dal and some rice.
Awesome. Yeah. And what do you think they would wait? They would probably. How do you think they would hopefully react?
I hope they would love it. I feel like that's one that I've been practicing a long, long time, and I think, yeah, I've nailed it. So I'd hope that they'd really enjoy it.
That's right. That's right. Well, let me get you out of here on this one. For all the work that you're doing and sharing and bringing people together through this expression and through your food and through what you're doing online and social media, when someone's either watching your work or reading your recipes and in a way creating some of the and reproducing some of the things that you're doing, um, and especially if they're doing so for the first time and they're just getting to know you a little bit they're just getting to know you a little bit through this work. How do you hope they feel when they're actually engaging?
Free. I hope they feel free to experiment. You don't have to stick to the rules. There are really no rules. My recipes can be more of a guide if you want them to be. And I think just the freedom in cooking and adding what feels right for you is the most important thing, because that not only makes it a liberating experience, it also helps you to discover new and delicious combinations of your own.
Sanjana, I love that so much, and I know that people are being liberated and being free to be themselves, and you're being a big part of that. Thank you so much for joining me today. What a lovely conversation, and I hope we can visit with you again down the road.
Absolutely. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
You're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. Stay tuned.